Welcome to the Salience Podcast, where we identify what stands out from all the noise.
Our guest on the Salience Podcast today is Diana Renner. Diana is a writer and leadership consultant based in Melbourne. Her first book, Not Knowing, The Art of Turning Uncertainty into Opportunity, was published in 2014 and won the UK Management Book of the Year award in 2015. Her second book, Not Doing, The Art of Effortless Action, was published in 2018. I reached out to Diana to discuss the theme of culture in this, our second season of the Salience Podcast. Specifically, I want to explore the culture of being overly busy and what to do about it. And as a backdrop to that, I wanted to showcase her published works on not knowing and not doing, so this theme of not. I'm also curious to explore Diana's early life as a refugee, both from the perspective of resilience and also how those experiences influenced Diana's take on leadership today. So welcome, Diana.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You've got a fascinating backstory, and I'd like to know a little bit more about that journey long before you're a writer, management consultant. I'm really interested in what early experiences helped to shape your thinking and approach today. So, tell us a little bit about your backstory and any pivots or tipping points in life that led you to where you are now.
Well, as you rightly pointed out, a lot of our interests and attitudes sometimes, I think stem from early childhood experiences. And I happen to have been born in a communist country in Romania in the 70s, in the early 70s, and grew up in a very strict totalitarian society. Really, it was my way or the highway. It was I felt as a child the restrictions of not being able to speak your mind, not even as a child, of not having a voice, of adults or people who had more power having more having the right answer to everything. So the schooling system was also quite restrictive in that you wouldn't be able to have your own opinion. Everything was rote learning. So it felt suffocating, limiting. Even as a child, I realized that I wasn't really growing up in a place where I could be thriving. And, my childhood at home was loving and supportive and nurturing. So I was lucky to have a good family. But overall, the communist regime had infiltrated the culture. Talking of culture, the culture of the country, the way people behaved with one another, and it really challenged me, I think, to think about who I was and who I wanted to become. And so when we found ourselves political refugees overnight, when I turned 16, a short while after I turned 16, my parents basically packed my brother and I in the back of the car, and overnight we crossed the border into Hungary. A day later, we found ourselves in Vienna seeking asylum with the Red Cross, and that became that started our refugee story, our refugee journey. And after a year and a half of living in asylum in Austria, we were lucky to be resettled in Australia. So I guess I had a big change that was completely unexpected for myself, my brother and I. And it really forced me to learn new ways to adapt to a new situation. Really one of those situations where there are no guides, there's no maps, no experts, nothing that it could show you the way, nothing that you could rely on is tried and tested to tell you how to behave or how to be or how to just even survive.
There's lots and lots of things I'm interested in. One of them is this idea that the education was about rote learning. And then you've moved eventually to Australia, I'm guessing around the age of 17 after spending time in Vienna. What did you notice that was different about education over here? Do we still have rote learning? Was it different culturally? Was it more questioning?
Oh, it's huge. It's another world. I only did 2 years of high school before I went to university, but they were really happy years. I felt supported. I felt encouraged. I really was able to very quickly adapt and find my voice because I was allowed to have one, and teachers were genuinely interested in what I thought. I was shocked to see students argue with teachers and really seriously debate ideas. So the idea that someone had monopoly on the truth didn't exist in the school that I went to here in Melbourne. So it was an amazing experience for me. It was like so much opportunity, so much potential, amazing. So I can't explain what that feels like when you come from a place that is so narrow, restricted, and, as I said, suffocating.
I think what you've identified there is really at the heart of quality culture. If you can question, and if you can be curious, and if you can genuinely debate in a team, in an organisation, in a nation, within your education system, I think you're in for a really healthy opportunity to learn and improve. There are certainly pockets in our culture where that's discouraged. Teams where they'd have low psychological safety, they don't feel that they can question, particularly authority. Even in science, where there's a dogma established and people don't want to challenge whether it's the lead professor in a research group or a way of thinking. And I think it's really dangerous to restrict that way of questioning. And I think what you've highlighted there is such an important part of culture. Have you, as a consultant, working with leadership management consultancy, have you seen that sort of difference between different teams? Those where there's a lot of inquisitive challenge, curiosity, and those where it seems to be shut down. Is that a feature you've identified?
Yes, I mean, as you know from your own work, that is a common. I think there are common features of different workplaces, work cultures around the world. I think that it's not just a country-related culture, although different cultures around the world have their own ways of managing people and managing, authority. What we're talking about here is the role of authority and the role that authority plays in homes, in communities, and in workplaces. So it's really about how someone actually steps into their role of authority and what they do with that role. And I think someone who actually steps into that role with confidence, but humility at the same time, with an understanding that they don't have all the answers, that they have the confidence in themselves to say, I don't know, to ask for help. I think that actually counterintuitively breeds a culture that is more open to learning, to experimenting. It's that psychological safety that you were talking about. I often insecure managers who don't trust themselves. They feel worried about being challenged, or they feel worried about looking incompetent. That's the source of many of the challenges of cultures which do not support people's learning and growth. And as a result, they are stifling, lack creativity, lack innovation, lack that risk-taking that is important in innovation and in learning.
Yeah, I wonder if this really gets to the heart of this concept of not knowing, not doing, where when we're looking to challenge, particularly this insecure manager, this sense of authority that's not coming from a double-edged perspective where you've got both authority and humility, as you say. I wonder if those are the most challenging things that we need to surface. That, hey, we're not, do we know what we're doing here? What's the uncertainty? Are we talking about the uncertainty? And then that really big challenge about not doing and making decisions to say no to things that are perhaps not the most strategically important aspects. And this really cuts to your two books with that theme. Can you tell us a bit more about this idea of not knowing and not doing, these ideas, and how they've evolved and how they relate to this to culture and leadership?
Well, the ideas are counterintuitive because, if you think about it, who would want not to know and who would want not to do? So if you literally look at those two titles or two, you would think, well, it goes against everything that we learn from early on. And so it's not really what Stephen, my co-author, and I, what we're really trying to emphasize is not the idea that you have to be ignorant or that you have to be lazy. What we wanted to challenge is the dependence, our over-dependence on knowledge and where that can be limiting us, and our over-dependence on doing, solving, and how that can limit us. And in particular, in the kind of world that we live in that the fast-paced, uncertain, and complex, highly complex world that we live in. And the times we live in require us to really be a lot more nuanced in the way that we show up in the workplace and in our lives. And this is not just lessons or principles or ideas that are just useful in the workplace, but also there are ideas that have been around for hundreds and thousands of years. And in particular, if you look at Buddhist cultures, who have actually embraced the not knowing and not doing are core to the Buddhist philosophies and cultures.
Just thinking about those principles, some of them very ancient, as you've described, from Buddhist teachings. We're in January. It's the start of a new year. This is where people go, right, I'm going to do it differently this year. I'm not going to, I'm going to, and there's usually something about work-life balance or whatever it is that they set up to do in January. And before you know it, everyone's just enmeshed in this busyness. Busy. You ask people, how's it going? Oh, I'm really busy. And I think if there's one thing I'd like to be not saying this year, it's that I'm really busy.
Yeah.
What are some of the principles or tips that you might have to break that culture of busyness?
Well, I guess to start to step back from before we get into tips and principles, to look at the broader principles around both books, and that's something that actually was inspired by the English poet John Keats, who wrote a letter to his brothers in the late 1800s, and he was really he was very admiring of a quality that he thought William Shakespeare had, that he called negative capability. He called it negative capability, and he described it as the capability of dwelling in mysteries and doubts without irritable reaching after fact or reason. I love this description because it actually encapsulates the kinds of capabilities that we need to foster in our workplaces, in our families, in our communities. And so they're not negative because they're bad. They're negative because they require letting go of or negating something that is already there. So the questioning, the doubt, the humility is a negative capability, are negative capabilities, because it's the opposite of what, you feel like doing. So the humility is actually letting go of some of your false security or false confidence. So doubt is actually maybe questioning what you know. And so there's a not ingrained in that negative capability of saying, well, maybe what I know is not sufficient, or maybe what I know is actually not useful, or maybe my assumptions about this particular situation are wrong. So it really is questioning yourself. So both books have a set of negative capabilities, and this is where I'm getting to the tips and the principles, which are learning from ancient cultures, and learning also from different professions and different people around the world who actually practice not knowing and not doing. There's a way of life for them. And you often see that in artists, but often you see that also in entrepreneurs, in scientists. So there are different, not everyone in those professions, obviously, but there are those principles that are the core of the negative principles and capabilities at the core of both books. that we can learn from, and we can see whether we can actually practice them in our daily lives. So with not knowing, as I was saying, it's the beginner's mind, the doubt and humility that comes from a Zen capability, which is called beginner's mind. And there's a famous saying, for the beginner there are many possibilities, and for the expert there are few. So it's really challenging experts to go broader and wider rather than go narrower. And so, the whole idea about being an expert is you go deep and narrow. And the danger of going deep and narrow is that you sometimes forget there are different perspectives, different views, and maybe there's a vested interest in holding on to what you know. The more you get praised and rewarded for your expertise, the harder it is to let go of. So it's really encouraging people to go broader, to challenge their what they think they know, and to seek advice and seek opinions from other people around them. It's easier said than done, and you would know this from your own work. It's not an easy thing to do when there's so much writing on what you know, and when everyone in the workplace is looking to you to have the answer. So there's an ingrained dependency on experts. It's not just the experts' responsibility, but also, this is a two-way street. There's a dynamic that gets set up between leaders and followers, whatever you want to call them, experts and, people looking to the experts for the answer, or managers and employees, where that authority dynamic gets played out in workplaces, but also in families. As you know, with kids, they look to you to provide the core functions that authority provides: direction, protection, and order. And you need to do enough of that in order for your family to thrive. And you need to do enough of that in order for your team to thrive in the workplace. But too much direction, too much protection, too much order, too much knowing and knowledge and expertise can actually counterintuitively get in the way and breeds dependency. So this negative capability is letting go of some of that. And so with not doing, we're looking at how can we engage in a different kind of doing. We're not saying that we are encouraging inactivity, like the kind that arises from fear or from inertia or indecision, or being passive. We're not actually proposing that. And this is really something really important to think about not doing as a different kind of doing, one that comes from a place of presence, a place of openness, a place of aliveness. And you will know, again, this from your own work, that when we are present, open, and alive to what's happening around us, we are engaged in that, fully engaged in that complex, dynamic, and interconnected world that we live in. And so we are better able to notice, to observe, to collect data, to interpret data, and to then make decisions that are hopefully a bit better than if we were just to react automatically on automatic pilot. So I've said a lot here. Is there any particular threads that you'd like to pick on?
Yeah, I took away that fundamentally from the position of not knowing, it's about us letting go of the need to be the expert and know the answers. And instead, the skill to learn is the ability to, and these are my words now, to get rapport with a diverse range of people. It's about seeking opinions from others to get that perspective. We talk about inattentional blindness with experts, where they don't see the patterns that are outside of their scope. To use the other metaphor, it's like you've got a hammer and you're looking for a nail, and there's no other solution. There's lots of metaphors like that. And then for the not doing, and this gets back to my question about how do we challenge busyness. What I took from what you said was it's about being present and being aware. It's not about just not doing anything. It's about doing things with a greater sense of openness and presence. Yes. And some of the really simple tips and tricks that we recommend for that are sometimes to set a timer. If you're going to get involved with busy work, set yourself a timer that actually gives you some feedback that says, hey, you've just spent this amount of period of time in a deep dive of whatever it is you're doing. And now perhaps it's now time to step back and come back into being present. And sometimes we need a trigger. And we talk about this metaphor of step back, and it usually involves a change in our posture. We literally step back. We come up in our posture. We breathe, and then we bring our awareness to what's around us. And I think that can be a nice little kick out for this busyness and get us back into presence and presencing. And then really making it some sort of conscious decision. Well, where am I going to place my attention now? And I think there's a misnomer that we can manage time. We can't manage time. Time's invariant, unless you get into the realms of physics, of course, and planetary. But let's not go there, right?
Yeah.
But what we can manage is our attention. That's it. That's all we can really manage. Where is my attention moment by moment? And I think that's what I've really enjoyed about, reading your works, reading your stuff. It's about that, placing attention. It's about presence. That's what I took.
Yes, well, the being an automatic pilot, I mean, there are habits that we get into, and it's even hard to distinguish, to name, or to even become aware of what is actually driving us. So the stepping back that you're talking about can actually give us an opportunity to feel that knot in our stomach, that pressure in our chest. There are physical sensations and visceral reactions that we have, and that often manifest when we need to control, when we feel like we need to jump into action quickly, when, we sometimes engage in mindless action, sort of that mindless action that often we all engage in from time to time. But really taking a step back, as you're saying, and really noticing how we actually engage in our lives, and what is our relationship to action, to doing, can actually give us clues to where the solutions are, the tweaks are. So we're not, we're here, you and I are not talking about people, just taking a break, like going on a cruise or, going on a retreat somewhere. That's great. But then you get back into things in the workplace, and it's just really, you just get stepped back into that river, and the current in the river is very strong. It pulls you. It's very hard to work against it. It's very hard to swim against it. So there has to be a different way to engage with that strong current, because workplaces are fast. There are outcomes focused, outcomes driven, solution focused. There are things that need to get done. It's about how we engage with those things that need to get done. That is what we're talking about. And you talk about stepping back, and you think, well, yeah, it's obvious, but actually it's really, really hard to do. And you will know this from your own work and coaching, that for people to step back, yes, it's in your body, it's but how do you take those strategic pauses? How and in the book, in Not Doing, that's called Let the Mud Settle. We use these poetic ways of actually hopefully inspiring people to say, when you are struggling with a complex set of events that may not be predicted, or the big decision that you need to make, how do you create those strategic spaces where you can regroup, or we can reflect before you react? And those kinds of spaces can be built into meetings. They don't have to be very long, but you can actually build them, as you said, step back, push your chair back from the table, sit on your hands. Imagine yourself like a camera high up, sort of on the wall, watching down on you and seeing what it sees. Sort of any ways in which you can have any strategies you can imagine that you can detach yourself and step. I call it get on the balcony, is really, really important. So before you do anything, you need to step back, let the mud settle. Then there's a whole section in the book called Let Go of the Shore. And again, it's like crazy to think that we're going to let go of the shore, but that's actually how do you let go of all your commitments, all your expectations placed on you, all the things on your to-do list, stepping back from that and saying, well, what do I need to say no to? And maybe you need to say no to a good opportunity every week, That's another tip. Can I say no to one good opportunity every week? A lot of people who find it really hard because it's hard to say no to something that looks really exciting and shiny and, could be an opportunity to learn and grow. But I mean, how long is your to-do list? Yeah, so those are a couple of things. And then there are other sections around letting things emerge. So how do you let things emerge? And also in complexity, as you would know, how do you, especially because we often chase results and we live in a results obsessed world. I mean, one of my kids has finished year 12 last year, it was all the marks, all about the results. Even now at uni, it's all about the results, It's really, really hard that's ingrained and built into us through the education system. So we make this false assumption that expending more effort will increase our chances of achievement and success. I don't know if this is the Protestant work ethic that, the more effort you put in, the better the outcome will be. Well, then the effort becomes the end result. It becomes all consuming. And so I really want to challenge this belief that if you don't make progress, it's because you haven't put in effort or enough effort. And you know this from complexity that chasing the outcome and not focusing on the process, when you prioritize an outcome, you risk missing out on the joy associated with the process, but also you are in danger of compromising the very thing that we are working towards. So not being attached to our goals, paradoxically, holding them lightly and focusing instead of the process can yield more effective, successful results. And, worked with my daughter in year 12 on that approach. Very challenging. It's not just a challenge for teenagers doing year 12, but actually I think for everyone in the workplace, to be honest with you, I think it's one of the hardest things to learn or unlearn.
Yeah, she's taken on that culture. So much there. This idea, we talk about work smarter, not harder. You're talking about hold things lightly. What's really important is you talked earlier on about the sensations in your body, these visceral sensations, the knot. And sometimes that can relate to this saying no. You reminded me of an experience I had 13 years ago now. I went along to my first training in clean language with James Lawley. And I turned up. I hadn't really done much of this stuff before. And I had a really bad back. Like, I was really uncomfortable and I was in a lot of pain. I was sat very uncomfortably. I had painkillers, but they hadn't really shifted anything. And the opening question, we got to work in small groups. And I remember this vividly. The person who was coaching me really was struggling to coach. She was not in a great state. She was worried she was self-conscious. She was all sorts of stuff going on. So she wasn't a great coach. But the question was, what would you like to have happen? And my answer was, I'd like to not have a sore back. And then the following question is, and when you don't have a sore back, then what will you have? Oh, well, I'll be free. Anyway, we worked around this coaching modality for about an hour. We're back. I'm learning to coach. She's learning to coach. And we did this stuff. And I had this massive realization that my sore back was related to my lifestyle. I was working as an executive in government. And all of this sort of stuff started popping up about my life. And I made the commitment to go back to my accommodation. This was in Melbourne. And delete every meeting out of my life that wasn't going to bring me joy or be really, really useful. And I got back home. I still had a sore back, and I sat down and I just went through and I spent about an hour and a half just changing my relationship to work, like profoundly. I went through my calendar and just deleted meeting after meeting after meeting, dozens of them. I cleared out a whole raft of projects. I thought, I'm not going to do that. And I just took so much out of my life, and I swear my back pain dropped. I lost about 85% of the pain. I could move. There was a whole bunch of stuff in my body unconsciously that was building up. I still had a bit, And I had a bit to do with changing my life and, exercise and mobility and other stuff. But the bulk of the pain went in one day. And I had no idea that my back pain was in any way related to my lifestyle. And that was, I come from science and engineering, not woo-woo and crystals. So this was like proper concerning for me. I was like, what on earth just happened there? I had no idea about the unconscious at that point. I wasn't really into that sort of stuff. But this was a really profound moment. This sensation in the body, the signal was you need to stop doing what you're doing. And fundamentally, and the sense of relief as I went through my calendar and went delete, delete, delete. Oh, it felt great. Well, just thinking about me as a struggling executive and the work that you do, just when you go and you meet a new client or you're working with a client, where is your attention? What are you curious about when you're working with a client?
Well, I mean, it depends on what they're calling me to work with them on. And, what are the initial questions that I'm getting, or what is the brief, I guess. But often I spend time listening and taking in as much information as I can. So it's that listening, deep listening and observing. And hopefully not judgmentally, so really trying to understand what is going on. So I really do have a diagnostic approach to understanding the issue, no matter what the actual, what are the presenting factors, but also getting deeper into what are the dynamics, what are the facts of the situation, and speak to as many people as possible. So that diagnostic approach is really important, because you could be told one thing by a client. The client may have a limited understanding of what is happening, or may have one perspective on what is happening, but it's not the truth on what might be going on. So if I have the opportunity to spend time to understand and diagnose the issue, then there are much better ways to then present that to the client and say, well, here is what I've learned. Objectively, here are the facts, here's the data. That's really important. And then let's look at how we might hypothesize about what this actually tells us. It could mean a variety of things. So it's not me just saying, well, it's not like a doctor saying, oh, I think you've got, I don't know, heartburn, or, oh, you've broken a leg. It's not like that. Often, as you know, again, the work that we do, it takes a lot of hypothesizing, interpreting and understanding, looking in different ways at the data to understand what might be going on. And then, as soon as we're putting people in the mix, it's pretty complex, and then presenting a series of options in terms of what might be able to help. But the most important thing for me is renegotiate expectations, because when people call me in, often they think that I can solve their problem. It's not like going to the doctor again. And sometimes even doctors can't solve the problem, because the work is not with the doctor, the work is with the patient often. So for me, managing those expectations and renegotiating those expectations that are placed on me, it's quite a big deal, because I need to say, look, I think some of the things I could help with, some of these things. I might be able to run a course or train or develop or coach or consult, or here's how you could roll out this culture change program. But a lot of the work that needs to be done is in the hands of the people in that workplace, and how they step into that, how they show up to work, how they work with one another, how they embrace that learning opportunity is really in their hands, not in my hands. And that's often a hard thing to tell a client. What's your experience?
You're often presented with really unrealistic expectations of what you can achieve in an afternoon workshop. And quite often they'll say, well, look, my staff are really busy. I can't have them at the office too much. I can't have them all out together. What can you do in an afternoon? And my short answer is not very much. I might be able to get to the point where they realize that they have a major problem, because you clearly do. And we might have some idea what the problem is, but you're really not going to get the solutions. Another observation I make is I ask the question, how long did it take you to learn your technical skills? And people usually say, well, it's taken me 10 years to become this engineer, scientist, medical professional, whatever it is they're doing. And how long have you spent learning to lead and manage people? Well, I've done an afternoon course, or I read a book once. And I usually say, well, guess what? It's a profession in itself, and you're probably going to need to spend more than 2 hours learning how to lead people and manage this complex organization of 100 folks, or a $5 million budget, or whatever it is you've got. So yeah, I think what I liked about what you said there was you really take a complexity approach. You don't come in as the expert. You ask questions. You look for diversity of opinions, and through all of that, and then you said that you look for options, multiple options. You form hypotheses and identify options that can address those and test those hypotheses. And ultimately, and I think you've hit the nail right on the head here, you can guide and facilitate, but really it's about the actions that are taken within the business to change culture or change the way that people achieve what it is they're setting out to achieve. I'm interested again on this idea of culture change, and I have a philosophy that the sooner you can get there, these small changes, the easier it is. If you've got a completely disharmonious, an organisation in conflict, it can take quite a lot to get everything back together. You got to rebuild trust, you got to rebuild teams. Sometimes you just have to move people on. What are some of the weak signals that you look for? I talk about a weak signal that it's not super clear. You don't have a clear answer. What is it you look for, and what is it you do or would like to encourage more of, particularly around this idea of culture and performance?
Well, I think we're coming full circle to where we started, because I'm really interested in the relationship between people, how they communicate with one another, and how they engage with one another in the workplace. And their relationship with their bosses, their managers, often tells you a lot around the psychological safety that is present or not in the workplace. Conversations often, so are there meetings after the meeting, like where people actually meet, and then if they don't feel like they can say whatever they need to say, they can't, there's not enough safety. So then they have another meeting afterwards, but it might be over a coffee or in the corridor conversation. So I'm looking for signs that that openness to sharing one's ideas, to entertain the possibility of being wrong, or there might be a different way of looking at it, of encouraging perspective, even conflict. That is a sign of a healthy workplace. So it could be in people's body language, in the way they're sitting in a meeting room. When the boss comes in and stands at the head of the table and they start talking, and they talk for 10 minutes non-stop. You think, okay, that's interesting. I don't know exactly what that means yet, but who runs the agenda? Is there space for people to come in, and when they come in? Do people ask questions? Are they do they feel like they can ask questions? What kinds of questions are they asking? It's really basic stuff, but often in those, weak signals, you can tell a lot about a culture.
Yeah, even that notion that the boss comes into the head of the table, that tells you a lot straight away, doesn't it?
Yeah. Body language, silence. Is silence tolerated? Space for questions and coming in. Does everyone talk? Can everyone talk? Or does only one person monopolize the conversation? How regimented is the flow of the conversation, or how regimented is the agenda? Is there a check-in even? Like, do people actually even do a check-in before they jump straight into the work? Often check-ins are a great way to establish that psychological safety, because it's like basically being a human being and saying, hey, how are you going today? What's on your mind? It only takes 5 minutes, but it's amazing what it can do for psychological safety.
Yeah, absolutely. Just building on this idea of where we place our attention in culture, what are some of the signals? If you could direct people's attention to something important in the world, absolutely broadly now, anywhere you like, what would it be?
Oh, that's a big question. One issue.
Yeah. Interestingly, if I answer this myself, and I hope I don't steal your answer here. My answer, and I've never given my answer on the podcast before. I usually wait for the person I'm interviewing, but my answer is where you came in, and that is, it's about your learning and your approach to learning. And are you curious? Are you genuinely curious? Do you question?
Yeah.
And if I could direct people's attention to anything in the world, it would be that one thing. Because I think from there's a catalyst for all of the major issues in the world. Climate change, inequity.
Learning orientation.
Learning orientation. I think that would be my one. That would be my one. Would you have anything different?
Well, I mean, the hard thing is just choosing one thing. So, of course, I mean, that I totally agree with that. That for me is so important. I was actually thinking of how much, I was recently in Romania last year, and how much damage communism has done on, to people's psyche, people's way of looking at the world. And there is no sense that I could see, and, this is not true for Romania, but the pockets that I experience, there's so little trust in others and your neighbor, because communism was there set up to breed fear and distrust in people. So you couldn't trust anyone because they could be spying on you, or they could be doing all sorts of things. And this is not just commentary on communism in Romania, but I think what I notice is this: there's a lack of I wish people. I think there's this kind of connection to others that are different from you, and this ability to be curious. It is a curiosity, but to engage with others who have a different opinion than you, to to tolerate even difference, because difference is scary. And I think a lot of issues in places like Romania stem from a lack of tolerance, ability to understand, or fear, or lack of compassion towards the other. And for me, I think there are parts in ourselves that we don't tolerate, and we can easily project on others. But I think there is this idea that, for me, diversity of ideas, of perspectives, and also an ability to embrace other viewpoints will make for I think a better workplace. And what we see in Brazil, that just happened over the last couple of days, what we saw in the States, what we see in Ukraine, and so in Russia and Ukraine, there are symptoms of a world that I don't like, that I wish I could change. There are systemic issues, there are complex issues, they're not things that could be easily changed. And I think, I often, I think I'm driven by that in my own work, in supporting, opening, creating the space for new perspectives, new ideas, new roles to emerge that actually can enrich our lives, but it can also make us more connected, more compassionate, more inclusive towards one another, and towards all of the diversity that we need in order to actually manage and hopefully succeed in this complex world that we live in.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, as you were getting to there, the shutting down of questioning, of curiosity, of enforcing a doctrine, a single way of thinking, it's not unique to communism. And in fact, the extremes of left and right use the same tactics.
Yes.
Same with religions and cults, politics, all of that.
Yes.
These bodies, that discourage open questioning, extremely dangerous and something to be alert to. I've taken a lot from our conversation today, and I usually try and summarize my top 3 takeaways. There's too many here to get into 3, but here are 3. The first was this idea, particularly as experts, to broaden our view and seek diversity, accept that we don't know, and acknowledge that one way to get insights is to ask many people for their ideas. And of course, that creates all sorts of things, a ripple through culture. For us to be able to do that effectively, we need meetings that allow psychological safety. We need to set up systems and culture that allows and promotes challenge, new ideas. I think the second thing I took away was the importance of being present and being mindful of the sorts of actions that we do take. So this isn't just getting caught up in busyness and some patterns of just repeat, busy, but really stepping back, being present. And then you had some tips for taking action. This idea, I use the metaphor, get on the balcony or being a camera. We talk about this step back, observing yourself. It's called third person, that third person observer. Celebrate saying no to a good opportunity. I like that particular tip, and allow emergence. It's not just about more and more effort, and that doesn't produce the end results that many people are looking for. I use the words work smarter, not harder. And sometimes you said, hold goals lightly. And on that idea of, holding goals lightly, we began exploring your early days. You've as a refugee, and then into a really different education system where you saw people disputing with their lecturers that and having a genuine debate, and that set you off onto a varied career in leadership and writing books as an author. And what does the future hold? What are your future aspirations, work or elsewhere in life? What's the near and long distance future hold?
It's a good question, I guess, for the beginning of the year. And I was thinking about my need to. I think all this change that I had early in my life has actually, in a way, primed me to engage with, to seek change and to embrace it as a source of creativity. And I feel like, there was some change for me last year, but I feel like more change is required, and I'm excited about it. I'm excited about making more changes. My kids are a bit more grown up, so I can actually start entertaining the possibility of what that might be for me. But certainly being more creative, writing. I'm working on another book, and creating space for new things to emerge. Engaging with the world. I feel like for many of us, most of us, the last couple of years, especially before last year, they were hard years, more solitary, more disconnected from the world. So I want to be more out there in the world. I don't know what that would look like. So my writing is more internal and introspective, but there's so much that I'd like to discover and engage with out there in the world. And so I'm going to be exploring what that might look like for me this year.
So a focus on creative writing.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your time today. I've really enjoyed
Thanks.
our conversation. I've taken some things away that personally I'm going to apply.
Thank you.
So thank you for that.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Salience Podcast. Please leave us a review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to the Frontline Mind newsletter by visiting our website at frontlinemind.com. Have you got a topic you would like some more salience on? Send us a message on LinkedIn or email team@frontlinemind.com.